Good day, everyone. I am just going to walk you through the article that I have posted on RenWeb today about probabilities. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to the discussion of the laws themselves. So we have the product rule, and then we have the sum rule. So the first one I'm going to look at here is the product rule. So the product rule is used when you're looking for the probability of two or more independent events occurring together. Okay, and if you're looking for that, then you can find that by calculating or by multiplying the individual probabilities of these events. So the example it gives you here is if you roll a six-sided die once, you have a 1/6 chance of getting a 6, and we all understand that. It makes sense. If you roll the dice twice, or two dice at once rather, what are your chances of getting 2 6s? So the probability of a 6 on one die and the probability of 6 on the second die. So since we are looking for these both things to happen at the same time, so a 6 on one and 6 on the other, so this is also called the AND rule, we're going to multiply those things. Okay, if we're looking at a more applicable example here for genetics, we're saying what are the chances of an offspring being homozygous recessive. Okay, so we're looking for homozygous recessive right here, and if we draw it upon its square, we can see this a little more clearly, but mathematically, let's have a look at this. So what are the chances of the father giving a recessive allele? He has two alleles. One of those is recessive. So 1 of 2, or 1/2 chance of the father passing the recessive allele. Okay, and we look at the mother, who's also heterozygous, and she has 2 different alleles. So what's the chance that she gives her recessive allele? It is 1 of 2. So we are going to multiply that because we want what are the chances of both events occurring. Okay, so the recessive from the mom and the recessive from the dad. Okay, so 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4, and that is very similar to the problem you worked on your pigeon genetics activity that you did last week. Okay, so this is the AND rule, and we're going to multiply the two probabilities. Okay, so the second one is called the sum rule of probability. Okay, and in this case, we're calculating the probability that any one of several different events will occur. So this, like I said, is called the sum rule, and according to the sum rule, the probability that any of several mutually exclusive events will occur is equal to the sum of the event's individual probabilities. So the example they give here is if you roll a 6-sided dice, you have a 1 in 6 chance of getting any given number, but you can only get one number per roll. You could never get both a 1 and a 6 at the same time. These outcomes are mutually exclusive, so you can only get one or the other, and thus leading us to the rule, or being called the OR rule, one or the other. Okay. So the chances of getting either a 1 or a 6 would be 1/3, because you have 1/6 chance of getting a 1 and 1/6 chance of getting a 6. Okay, if you add those two together, 1/6 plus 1/6 is 2/6, which is equal to 1/3. Okay, if we are looking at a genetics problem here, it says, so let's look at a genetics problem example of this. So it says, let's use the sum rule to predict the fraction of offspring from a heterozygous being crossed with a heterozygous that will have a dominant phenotype. So we're either looking at homozygous dominant or heterozygous genotype. In this cross, there are 3 events that can lead to the dominant phenotype. And so we have our 3 combinations here. You can have 2 dominant alleles given, one from each parent. The other combination is a gamete from the mom that's dominant meets a recessive gamete from the father, giving us a heterozygous genotype, or a recessive gamete from the mom or allele from the mom meets the dominant gamete or allele from the dad. And that also gives us a heterozygous genotype. So these are all of the potential ways that this could happen. So the chances of both parents giving a dominant allele is 1/4. Okay. The chances of the mom giving a recessive and the father giving a dominant is here, 1/4. And then the chance of the father giving the recessive and the mother giving the dominant is here, 1/4. So the chance of dominant phenotype, so any of these three events, we're going to add those together, 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 gives us 3/4. And so that is the fraction of the potential of that outcome. Okay, the last thing to look at here's a kind of a quick caption of these two rules. If you're going to have a study guide, this would be a great thing to put on your study guide. The next thing to look at is in a dihybrid cross. So a dihybrid cross is something we haven't really talked about. A dihybrid cross basically is a Punnett square with 16 boxes instead of 4. And it's a little confusing. So I prefer to look at this from a mathematic point because it's a little bit easier to understand. So in this example, we have our setup here. It says, let's imagine, so we're going to start right here. Let's imagine that we breed 2 dogs with the phenotype big B, little b, big C, little c, where the dominant allele, big B, specifies black coat versus the lowercase b, being a yellow coat, and the dominant allele C, capital C, specifies straight hair or straight fur versus the recessive C, or the little c, which is curly fur. Assuming that the 2 genes assort independently and are not sex-linked, how can we predict the number of puppies that are heterozygous for both traits among the offspring? So the first thing we could do is draw a Punnett square with 16 boxes, but that's a lot of repetition in my opinion. So what we would actually do to figure this out mathematically is to break this down into 2 questions and then look at those. So the first question is, what is the probability of getting the heterozygous genotype for gene B? And then the second question would be, what is the probability of getting the heterozygous genotype for gene C? Okay, so we're going to hop on down here to this illustration because I think it shows it quite well. So we have two dogs, black dogs with straight fur. Okay, and so we're looking at what is the probability of big B, big C, little c. So we're going to break our question up into 2 different parts. The probability of a heterozygous genotype for the gene B, fur color, and then the probability of the heterozygous genotype for gene C, or fur texture. So the probability of the heterozygous for fur color is 1/2, as you can see here. Right? 1/2 of the offspring will be black with the heterozygous genotype. And over here, you have half of your offspring being heterozygous as well. So, since we want both of these to happen, we want to be heterozygous for fur color and heterozygous for coat texture. We are going to multiply. We're going to use the product rule. So 1/2 times 1/2 gives us 1/4. So 1/4 of the offspring will be heterozygous for both traits. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, call me, text me today, and I will gladly answer those. I will also be putting another video up with some of the problems from the worksheet that you're doing today. Me working those out for you guys. I'm going to work out the first 2 and then number 7 as well. If you also want to have a little bit more practice with these types of problems, down here is practice Punnett squares and probability. So just if you click on that, this will take you to a number of questions and you can choose your answers, and then you can check your answers at the bottom. And I think that there are 4 more problems that you could try, or 3 problems, I guess it looks like, that you could try. And if you're confused, here's a video or a hint that will kind of help you practice these things.